very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Early on in his infrastructure statement to Parliament last Thursday, the Prime Minister said something that I agree with. He said this: if Australia is to ride the wave of opportunity that the 21st century offers, we need better infrastructure. From there, the speech went downhill, Madam Deputy Speaker, because what we heard was he had a plan. He was going to do a study. There was going to be an examination. He was going to have a committee to look after the reports that had already been done by a committee. What we didn't have in an infrastructure statement for the Parliament was, of course, any attachment to it of legislation, any appropriation from the budget, because there wasn't a project named, there wasn't a project advanced, there wasn't a dollar announced. I don't know why you would give an infrastructure statement to the Parliament that doesn't announce any infrastructure, that doesn't have anything of substance whatsoever in it. And this comes at a time where infrastructure investment in this country is in freefall. The context here is the resources sector going from the investment phase to the production phase. At that time, because of the decline in infrastructure investment associated with the resources sector, what you should have had, when combined with the fact that capital is almost free, where the government earlier this year could have borrowed for infrastructure at long-term rates at a rate of under 2% per annum, what you should have is the government stepping in and ramping up that investment, because we know that there's a need. The member for Chifley just spoke about the M9. Why didn't the government use last Thursday to announce funding for the M9? They didn't even announce funding for planning for the M9, for preservation of the corridor, for getting the environmental approvals. Nothing came from last week's announcement. And this comes where public infrastructure investment has fallen by 20% in the government's first 2 years. It also comes whereby the government continues to say that it is going to spend $50 billion on infrastructure in the forward estimates. It's just not true. Just not true. Indeed, they're not even spending what they said they would spend in the budget papers of 2014. For example, in the last financial year, the government didn't spend $8 billion in 2015-16. They spent $5.5 billion, which, when you take into account the fact there was a $490 million payment to Western Australia to compensate for the GST, it is a $3 billion underspend on what they said they would do, or 35%. And this follows a $1 billion underspend the year before. At this year's election campaign, we put forward a comprehensive plan for infrastructure investment. The Cross River Rail in Brisbane, Melbourne Metro, Adelaide Light Rail, Perth Metronet, Western Sydney Rail. We put forward a comprehensive plan. We put forward and have advanced in this parliament again the need for a high-speed rail authority to advance that proposal. The coalition just offered more cuts. The Prime Minister likes to ride on trains and trams and take photos on them. We want him to fund them, to actually fund them, not just take photos on them. He spruiks city deals. And yet all that is matching our commitments to UTAS in northern Tasmania, matching our commitments that we'd made to the stadium and regeneration of the city of Townsville, and this vague promise in Western Sydney of, frankly, a pittance compared with what is required in Western Sydney. He said in last Thursday's statement that he's going to develop a freight strategy. There is one. It was done by Infrastructure Australia just after they did their national port strategy. It complements the two things together. And yet they can't even fund the final section of the Port Botany Rail Freight Plan through the Australian Rail Track Corporation, can be funded off budget, and they can fix the loop around southwest Sydney for a total of just under $200 million, so that you can bring that freight corridor up to the 21st century where it should be. At the moment, for the last section between Mascot and the port, it's one way. So you can't have trains going in and out to the port. If a train's going out, a train can't go in. It's a two-way corridor with a one-way road. It's completely absurd, completely absurd. And yet they can't do that. And if you look down to the smallest program, programs like Black Spots, a 55% underspend last year. The heavy vehicle program, a 65% underspend on what was put in the budget. The Bridges Renewal Plan, 40% down on what was promised. It reminded me last week of their 2014 budget when they spent money, $70,000, making a video about the 2014 Infrastructure Investment Plan. It's been taken down because it's so embarrassing, because none of it's happened. And then, of course, during this year, in the lead up to the election, they took $18 million that was allocated to build roads and rail lines and ports and infrastructure, and they spent it on TV ads, telling people what they didn't have and what they weren't getting. The truth is that people need to hold this government to account. And when it comes to Badgerys Creek Airport, you have a circumstance whereby there's a website where people get information about flights based upon some theory. It's not actually based upon any flight paths that have been worked out. The government says that it can follow Labor's announcement of ensuring there are no flights over communities at night, and nor should there be. Nor should there be. That is the advantage of the planning protections that were put in place around the Badgerys Creek site 30 years ago. 30 years ago. And that is why it is perfectly able to ensure that flights do not go over any communities at night from the second airport. And the government shouldn't have that contradicted by sites that are out of date by some bureaucrat. And they need to get on top of that and get on top of proper community consultation for that vital piece of infrastructure, for not just for Western Sydney, but for the national economy as well. This government needs to match up its rhetoric with reality. They need to start investing. They need to have proper consultation. They need to have proper infrastructure plans. They need to restore respect to Infrastructure Australia and put it at the heart of infrastructure development.
The question is that the document be noted, and I call the Honourable the Minister.
Thank you,